2002 is called the Facial Action Coding System. There are about 500 people who have learned this system. It's self-instructional. You don't learn it from me, you learn it from the materials, and who are using it in research on everything from looking at mother infants to evaluating advertising, to the impact of drugs on emotional life. Anytime you want to measure what the face does, if you want to look at sign language in the deaf, it's not restricted to emotion. The face does all kinds of things unrelated to emotion. It's a very slow and tedious system, and so now there are two major computer teams funded by the government, one at University of Pittsburgh, headed by Jeff Cohn, and one at UC San Diego, Salk, headed by Terry Sanowski and Marnie Bartlett, that are trying to automate our system. And within 5 years, this will be an automatic system where it will, as you're talking to me, a camera will be looking at you, and I would have a readout on momentary changes in your emotional state.
So then you could read, what could you read from that? My real intentions?
I could read your real emotions. Now, the tricky thing, and this is the thing I think in my teaching to law enforcement and counter-terror people, is the major thing that they come away with is emotions don't tell you their source. So if I thought you were just angry, I wouldn't know whether you were angry at me for talking too much, or whether you were feeling angry at yourself that you hadn't got far enough in your screen, or you were remembering a fight you had with your wife last night. So all you know is that the emotion is occurring. Then it's up to you to find out why, and you have to ask a question. Now, you have to, since you're taking that information, you have to, you might want to do it with some delicacy. So if I saw you looking angry for a moment, I might say, instead of saying, why are you getting angry? Which is always a bad, even if you know you're in the midst of an argument with your spouse, let's say, and to say, why are you getting angry, is to challenge their right to be angry, and you're going to just get more of it. But I might say, is there something else going on that maybe I should know about? Is there something that's bothering you? Anything I need to know? Because it's up to you as to what you want to share with me, not my prerogative, but if I acknowledge it, and that's so for the nurse working with it. Many people in the medical setting, this is really important information for them to know how their patient is feeling, because the emotions about the illness, the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment, the fear, really causes patients to either take longer to improve or to not comply with instructions. So it's very important to know how and in the medical situation, I believe that's one of the occasions in which you have the right to invade privacy. I mean, if the doctor and the nurse can look at you naked and enter your body orifices, then they can surely say, what do you, I sense that you're afraid right now, and it's important that I know what you're afraid of. You can go right to the heart of it, and you should. You have to learn how to see it. But once you see it in a doctor-patient, nurse-patient situation, you have those rights. Even in the family, you may not have those same rights. And in the criminal interrogation, that may not be the right way to handle the information. But the emotion doesn't tell you its source. Otherwise, you'll make Othello's error. Othello killed Desdemona because he thought that her signs of fear were of a woman caught in a betrayal. She was afraid of being disbelieved, and the fear of being disbelieved looks like just like the fear of being caught. Fear is fear. You have to find out which it is. That's a little disappointing, because people would like to think, oh, if you look afraid, that means you did it. No, it doesn't mean it. It means you're afraid.
I guess a question that comes to mind, because what you're saying, let me try to summarize it for the audience. You're trying to say that the face is an important element of the emotional system, and its expressions manifest the emotions, and that we can learn about ourselves and other people through understanding the face. Now, when I was preparing for this interview, it struck me that I was reminded of one of my favorite quotes from the Bible, which is, when I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see as through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. Now, I raise that, not to get on a sidetrack, but the notion here is that understanding can be found in face-to-face. Now, going back to Freud, it seems that when you discovered the face, it seems that you were opening a world that somehow we were obscuring. Was it civilization? In other words, have we evolved to where we cover up, we deceive, and we don't want to look at the things that you're drawing our attention to?
The simple answer is yes.
Yes.
And of course, that's less so in children.
Yeah.
Although by 7 or 8, you start to see a lot of concealment efforts and a lot of fabrication. And that's really my other area. It's a related area. It's an application, which is looking at demeanor, face, body, voice, and speech, not just the face, when people are deliberately attempting to mislead each other. Now, that goes on in much of social life for politeness. You know, you tell the host that it was a wonderful evening, even if the conversation was dull and the food was worse. But you're being polite. You thank your aunt for the tie, even if you're going to throw it away. That's politeness. I don't consider those lies. They are a form of deception, but not lies. And their stakes are usually quite low. I've been interested in high-stake lies. I started with the lie of the suicidal patient trying to get free of the hospital to take their life. And now I've worked on criminal and terrorism and political, all kinds of high-stake lies. But more generally, leave out those extreme cases. Most of us, most people who finished high school, let alone those who've gone to college, pay an awful lot of attention to words. And encoding words in a coherent fashion and decoding them is a tough task. It's not the easiest task in the world, and it takes most of our attention. And we tend to miss much of the information that's in the face. We have actually good evidence on that. Now, and that seems to be so across literate cultures, although that's not as well established as it would be nice, as it could be. The second thing is that most of us learn these display rules. And so even unwittingly, we're managing our expressions. I remember there was a novel I read in junior high, I think it was called The Virginian. You know, take that smile off your face. So it was the key line, or I'm going to shoot you. But, you know, don't look that way at your father. I wasn't saying anything, but to look angry at your parent, you're taught not, you can't do that. At least you used to be taught you can't do that. So we develop habits of managing expression that result in quite a lot of concealment and fabrication. Now, what we have found is that the concealments can be spotted, but most people need to learn it. And I've developed a CD that, to my great surprise, teaches people to spot them in less than an hour's time. But without that, almost everyone, including police and FBI, missed them. And the other much...
And this is the micro-expression?
These are micro-expressions.
Yeah.
Because what happens when we conceal a strong emotion, two things happen. One is it can be reduced in time. So it becomes micro, about a 25th of a second, and most people just won't see them, but you can learn to see them. And the other is they become very tiny. So those are the subtle expressions. But that can be learned. There's another CD on that. What's harder to spot is fabricated expressions. So if I put on enjoyment, well, there is a telltale clue, but it's very subtle. Most people don't know what it is. I could tell you now, but it might ruin your life, because then you know whether people were really enjoying themselves. You know, you should pause now. It's like on some of these internet things. Do you really want to learn this?
Yes.
Maybe your audience doesn't want to know this, because then you'll know whether or not your spouse is really pleased. Is that worth knowing or worth not knowing? He says, what matters? There's a professor who died fairly young, used to be at this university, a quite famous sociologist, Irving Goffman. And Irving's claim was what matters is what the person wants you to think, not how they really feel. Well, that's so in many situations, not all. There are situations where you really want to know how they feel and whether that's true or false. And so I could tell you what to look for. It won't really ruin your life because you probably need a little practice. And part of the issue is on learning some of these things, there's a difference between knowledge and skill. So if you think about, if you read a book on how to play tennis, you have all the knowledge and you can follow the game, but you can't get a ball over the net. That's the skill you need to develop. Now, the skill is worthless if you don't have the knowledge about when you're supposed to get the ball where, okay? So you need both. I can give you the knowledge, but then you'd need
So give
the
it
coaching.
to me.
Okay, here it is.
It's such a leader.
There are two muscles principally involved. Zygomatic major, which pulls the lip corners up, which in our system is action unit 12. And then, this is one that's very hard to do voluntarily, and Duchenne correctly said that its absence unmasks the false friend. Incidentally, Duchenne's book is now been translated and available in English, and I love to tell my French colleagues, well, you can read it in English, not available in French. That's really it's a good dig. Okay. Is a muscle called orbicularis oculi pars lateralis, and you can see why I've just given it number 6. I mean, you can't deal with these things with their Latin name.
Right.
So but it's only the outer part of this muscle. And what it does is it pulls up the cheek and pulls down this skin. Now the cheek does get pushed up just by zygomatic, so it's worthless as a clue. What you have to look at is what is called the eye cover fold, this area right here, and it lowers very slightly with true enjoyment. Now, from a Darwinian point of view, if it had been important for our species to know when people were truly enjoying themselves, then a more obvious sign would have evolved. It's clearly not had survival value. So it's hard to recognize. We can teach people to do it, but it's not easy to spot. So much of the time you won't know. Most people just don't know. What they know is that somebody looks like they're feeling good. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't.
One of the things that seems to come out of what you're saying is that as human beings living in modern society, there's a limit to the information that we can take in, even though,
you can be trained.
Yeah.
What you've actually gone through is a process of being trained not to, both by your parents who didn't want you to see things, and by your teachers in grammar school, which are often quite authoritarian, and then by your college training, and which really emphasized articulation and to the cost of everything else. Now all of us are as good as we're ever going to be, and we could afford to widen our attention back, to pay more attention to the face and the voice. The face is, the voice is, it's a dual system. The voice is every bit as important as the face. I haven't worked on it. Our knowledge of the voice is about where our knowledge of the face was 30 years ago. Maybe a little better, not much better. So there aren't training tools for the voice as there are now for the face. But the voice captures your attention when you're out of the room. Think of the poor caregiver. Think of the mother. She had to be looking at her infant all the time. She doesn't, because if the infant's in trouble, it'll cry and she'll hear it. However, you can just simply shut up, and then you don't know anything. There's no equivalent to shutting up facially. Your face is always there, always available. It's silent. You have to be looking, but it's always there.
You're in the unique position of being an advisor, a consultant to both the Dalai Lama and the Defense Department, or parts of the Defense Department, the Pentagon. The question arises then, what you've studied, the research that you've done is useful for different organizations and people for really different reasons. I would assume that the Dalai Lama is really interested in helping people understand themselves and others and so on, where, especially in the present environment, the Pentagon is really looking for telltale signs of individuals who in particular circumstances might be a threat to the United States or for other reasons. Talk a little about that.
Okay.
And
actually, there's more overlap than it might seem. Yeah. At least I like to think there is. The Dalai Lamas, I mean, I've had the opportunity to now meet with him 3 times, and I consider it, like my New Guinea trip, to have been one of the turning points in my life, and such a unique privilege to have contact with this really unusual man, very unusual. And I mean, this is all in the last 4 years, so it's very late in my career, but it raised questions that Buddhist thinking, and he himself as a person, what he's like, raised questions that I hadn't fully considered, and it caused me to rewrite the first half of my book after my first 5 days of talking with him. But what he asked me to do was to organize research on hard, objective research on the impact of meditative practices on emotional life, which I've done, and I raised the money for it, and now a colleague, Professor Margaret Kemeny, is leading that project, and we already did the pilot study. So what he was concerned, and he specifically said, now use a secular version. Don't teach Buddhism, teach meditation. And there's a secular version. And we've combined the secular version of meditation with some of the exercises in my book, which really come from Western, but there's a lot of nice overlap between the two. So that's a concern with helping people lead a better life. It's a concern with goodness, and my work with the Department of Defense, they're of course interested in being able to identify people who are a threat to our country, but not misidentifying people. And the major error that I find that occurs is the misidentification of truthful people who are under suspicion. So I'm helping them find the truth. And that most often means saying, no, he's not a worry. Sometimes saying, this is a person we need to get more information about. That's a crucial division. I've been teaching police for almost 20 years, and I'm now co-directing an organization that combines academics and policemen, experienced policemen, to teach law enforcement and other federal officials. And my university colleagues say, why do you want to help the police? And I say, well, were you pleased to hear about all the people on death row that the DNA showed didn't do their crime? Do you want more innocent people to be executed? Wouldn't you like them to do a better job? How can you not want to help the police? You know, all of our lives, our whole commitment to a justice system where we would rather let the guilty go free than to imprison the innocent, that's what you need to work on. That's what I'm helping them do, is make better, more careful evaluations. And so I feel in both of these are both my goodness activities. They are out of the same motive that led me to want to be a psychotherapist, was to try to bring about change in the world that would help people. And I'm doing it in these two very different paths, but I think both not only with the same knowledge bank, but with the same goals in mind. I do not teach people how to be better liars. So if the Defense Department asked me, and they never have, but if they were to ask me, can you train our undercover agents to be better, more misleading, I don't do it. I was asked in a previous administration, I won't say which, to train the president how to better mislead his adversaries in summit meetings. I wouldn't do that. And I will not do training. I do work in England, in Israel, in Canada, in Australia, but I will not train in non-constitutional democracies. And I have been asked many times to do that. So I try to limit. I don't want this work. I wouldn't, I got asked at one point, would I train Gorbachev's equivalent to the Secret Service? And I said, well, come back after you've had a constitutional democracy for a decade. I wouldn't have wanted to train the people who protected Hitler. So I'll only do this work in an area where I think it's going to be used more for the good than for the bad.
So the results of what you've discovered, on the one hand, can be taught and developed into skills, But on the other hand, some people do this naturally, have a natural gift. Is that correct?
Yes, we call those, currently we're calling them the wizards of deception, detection from demeanor, 3Ds. And we've tested 12,000 people. We have a videotape test, and we've identified 20 of them. Not many, but they're spectacular.
And what is the explanation for this?
We don't know why they're so good. We're trying to, with 20, it's not a very big sample. Right. I've just proposed to the Defense Department that we should test 250,000 people. It only takes an hour of their time. If we tested 250,000, we might have 2,000 of these people, and they could be used as interview consultants brought in on the most serious cases, because they're uncanny. I can describe what they do. They don't miss anything. Everything, whether it's every aspect of your speech, every aspect of your mannerisms, what you're doing with your hands, how you're moving there's nothing that they're not dealing with, and they're continuing to generate hypotheses as they go along. The group that's yielded the largest number of these are arbitrators. And I think that's because an arbitrator has to see both sides. And so they have to find where there's a common ground. I don't know whether that's so, because 90% of arbitrators are terrible. They're just as bad as psychiatrists or FBI. But there's about 8%, and that's a very high yield, the highest yield we've found for any group. Other than that, Secret Service is quite high too.
And are there, in addition to arbitrators, are there other professions that have high numbers of people?
Secret Service, that's the only other group.
That's the only other one. And are there certain professions that make people a little better on the scale? No.
No, we've tested everybody from customs officials to embassy officials to FBI, CIA, DEA, judges, trial lawyers, policemen. They're all a chance. I mean, really, they could just as well flip a coin.
So we can't live with the expectation that politicians, for example, are better at lying.
Oh, I haven't tested any politicians.
Okay, all right.
So I don't know.
Okay.
I'd be glad to. Well, of course, politicians are a tricky matter because you get involved in partisan issues, and I've tried to stay out of partisan politics. I was asked once by one of the political parties to do a personality assessment of a candidate for major office, I won't say how major, in order to identify where were the weak points that might cause the person to act explosively in public. And I thought seriously about it, because the candidate was someone who represented a political viewpoint that I strongly disagreed with. I said, I can't use my knowledge to try to harm people. Maybe I made a mistake, but that my commitment is it has to be used to try to help, not to harm.
I want to probe for a few minutes about lessons you've learned from your distinguished career in science and research. First of all, do you have a brief statement of your conclusions about humanity as a result of all this work? I mean, clearly you believe people, when shown the truth, can learn things about themselves, change themselves, and their interactions with other people. Anything else?
Well, I think there is an enormous hunger in our country. I can't really say about other countries. I suspect it's no different in any literate culture to try to improve emotional life. And that the emotion system wasn't designed, I don't believe, it didn't evolve for consciousness to play much of a role. And it evolved in a period in our history on this planet when we spent our lifetime as these people in the Stone Age culture did. They lived in the same village from birth to death, the same 150 people. That's all they encountered. We live in entirely different circumstances now. You'd ask a person in the Stone Age culture, can we go to the next village on Saturday? They'd say, how can I know today? Ask me on Saturday. I tried that when I came back. People would invite me to dinner 10 days later, and I'd say, well, I'll let you know 10 days later. How can I know today what I'm going to want to do 10 days later? You don't get away with that in our we live life as business. Even our social life is lived as business for nearly everyone. So our emotional life, there's a real cost. And so I think most people would like to be able to better understand why they're getting emotional and how to have their emotions be more constructive for themselves and others. And then the system didn't evolve for us to be able to do that very easily. So it takes a lot of work. But it is achievable if you want to spend the time. And in this last book, unlike, I wrote 2 other books earlier that were really trying to help people. One with, well, 3. One with telling lies about understanding deception. Another on why kids lie, to help parents. How do you deal with your child who lies? Because every child's going to lie. And there are things they need to learn about that because you don't want it to become a chronic pattern. But this book is the most explicit. It's, somebody said to me, it's, you know, it's between the chairs, which is never a good place for a book to be. You want it prominently on a bookshelf. Mine's between the chairs because it's sort of, it's not exactly a how-to, but it's not exactly a scientific treatise. It's somewhere in between. It's trying to give you the knowledge you need to bring about change in yourself.
One final question requiring a brief answer. What have you learned, or what advice would you give to students about doing research? You've made clear to us that you went down this path that nobody else was on, and it was one that really nobody seemed to want to go on, and the conventional wisdom was it wasn't worth going on. So it must have been a lonely journey, at least in the earlier phases.
And that was wonderful,
Yeah.
because I didn't have to deal with turf, and people weren't threatened by my work. They just thought I was wasting my time. That's much better. Mm-hmm. And in those days, NIH was interested in supporting high-risk research. So they gave me a chance. Even though most people thought it was crazy, the clinicians who used to be on the panel knew it wasn't. Mm-hmm. These days, if I was starting my career over, it would fail. I couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And that's rather disheartening to me, because high-risk research really isn't supported. But the idea of studying something, if I was starting all over, I would look at handwriting. Mm-hmm. Everybody thinks that's nuts. Bet you it's a personal product. I'll bet you there's some things in it. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are people who think they can get a lot from handwriting. I would start by studying them and seeing scientifically whether it's really valid, and seeing whether I could unpack it.